know, and say we'll pick up on the details around rebate court. And I liked your idea that there can be people at the end of life that may be looking around saying, I didn't really do anything for society. I'd like to do something now, and have their legacy directed to something beyond their life.
Yeah, I think when we're launching anything, if we're a quota grassroots, we have to think of what our funding would be. And the largest funding source I think is possible is probate court. Probate court, for any viewers, that's when somebody dies, they don't have family typically, or named family. They don't have a will established. And so then the court system, a probate court, would elect, I guess in some sort of manner, an attorney to represent the estate's interest, and then they would go through the process to distribute the resources of the deceased to their family, next of kin, or best wishes, I guess. So the idea is, if Sheepdog Democracy, Proprietarian, kind of our fold had a level of interest to put our kind of policy, campaign, principle, platform, whatever it is, out there to a degree where people could see it, certainly share it with others and say, oh, this is an organization that I'd like to support. This is my last will and testament, is I'd like to give everything I have to this group. And then what I was suggesting is that instead of a centralized model, unless there was something for scale, but we could probably figure out scale in a voluntary way, you'd have it just decentralized. So if it was somebody passes here in Hawaii, then we would handle it on a local scale group. Somebody passed in Toronto, you would handle it, and just go from there. And I think it's a way to, I know we're doing a lot of formulation here. It's a whole nother thing when you receive like $250,000. You're like, wow, how did that happen? Well, it could be just as easy as putting our hands up and our hand out and saying, hey, we're willing, this is what we stand for. We're willing to live and or die for these principles. Would you like to support and help this? And my caveat inside of it was, or I guess more like of an encouragement, is we have a huge generation of baby boomers, one of the largest per capita population. Most places are aging, some are dying, some are making their way out, that direction. So that would be a market. And if we brought that bell curve back in, we might really utilize it as that focus for that top 4%. And if we find the 4% that are also aging or whatever, they might encourage us to the living 4% that are kind of within their bubble too. Mm-hmm. It's just a thought. It's not required. I mean, obviously, to go the probate direction, somebody would likely have to form as either just a C corporation or a 501c3, a nonprofit of some sort. I don't know the dynamics on that, but it could be figured out. And then right next to it is this idea of what's called a captive insurance company. So a captive insurance company would be basically we all self-insure. We have to have, this is just initial research, it's somewhere north of $750,000 per year in premiums are paid to become your own company. So it's a sizable amount. We're, $7.5, $8 million in the 7 or 8 years, So we would, but that being said, I would think that the folks that we're talking about are probably some of the lowest risk individuals that we could, and we could determine what type of insurance do we cover. You could do auto, home, life. We could keep it in the life category, I guess, but I don't know more than the captive insurance. I think it's typically whatever you would usually shop for insurance for a company. Could just be liability. We could determine what it would, but there may be something where we could, as a sister company, would be here's our group that does 501c3 nonprofit. the probate side, and then here's our insurance. The two kind of go together because there might be a last minute living will type thing, and then you have a life insurance side. I think a lot of this is getting too far outside of our kind of intellectual efforts, but I do think that if we were looking to funding, we either have to find that 4% of wealthy donors, we have to reach out to Bitcoin millionaires and such. I mean, and that's not to say no to any of those efforts. I'm just thinking that there is an untapped market inside of probate court for people that haven't resolved their family estate, that we could, if they're aligned with our principles, be a perfect donation platform. And then I think sheepdogs and proprietarians, aside from fighting a revolution, are very low risk folks that have their heads on straight. So instead of wasting our money paying outside insurance companies, we could figure out how to self-insure within our own group. And then I don't know if that dovetails into the third one, which I mentioned briefly, is around having our own fraternity and sororities. I don't know if Elks, Moose, Eagle Lodge, those type of things. I don't know if they had their own insurance companies. I don't know what type of things they did, but it could be in that avenue of starting to talk a little bit more and formulating our own social norms and practices. And all three of the things I've been talking about is where the rubber hits the road. Yeah. It's great to have the ideals and what we intellectually think. I think it's another to try to put it into practice. And these are just a couple ideas that maybe we could give some effort at.
Yeah, and I like the direction, because essentially what we're talking about is creating commons. Even if it's not to the extent that it's like a formal insurance company. If, say, it's a fund that is there in case one of our members loses a job or breaks a leg and can apply for aid out of it, what we've done is we've created a common shared property in that fund, as well as the notion of some sort of fraternity. Again, we're creating commons based on our values and on our participation, which is the next logical step. It's just a matter of how we're going to do that. One other thing, when I talked to Ivar quite a while ago, and he was talking about starting up his business with his family, and he talked about it as being an increase in your own agency, Ivar. The thing that came to mind for me was like a seed bank or an investment bank, where we can help support each other become financially independent, whether that's starting a small business or becoming a contractor. We can invest in those businesses, or grants or loans or some sort of form like that, where collectively we're supporting each other to get away from the systems and get back into a position where we preserve boycott and cooperation. So I think all of these are where we need to go, and all of these are things that we consider. And I do think that we need to stay away from centralization. I like what happened with the fraternities, or I used Alcoholics Anonymous as an example, where it is completely decentralized, only operating at local levels. And really what glues it together as a community beyond the local level is the ideals and the name. And then policing within that. So if there's any activity on one locality that conflicts with the name, meaning conflicts with the ideals, then we police at that level only. It's really at that level, it's really about the interactions between localities. So that way we can be adaptive and responsive to the local level all the time, constantly changing in response to that, as opposed to forming an actual organization, which then I find ends up having to police in ways that loses that adaptability and imposes on the agency on a local level. So, and I think we all would agree on that, right?
Yeah. Basically, it becomes very complicated if we're going to police each other. Are we going to spy on each other or something? I just try to think it through, and it just becomes a new state.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like most of what we're trying to deal with anyways is the downfall of centralization, that any central organization is supposed to be there to support and cultivate individual agency. And really what are the requirements at a more centralized level? I mean, you'd have at one level you have the local domain, then the regional domain, and then sort of the universal domain across it. And across that universal domain, the only need of policing would be around preservation of the brand, in a sense, of the ideals and of the name. The regional level, I think the only thing that would need to be policed is the interactions between different locales within an area. If there's going to be interaction, then there needs to be a judge of last resort in terms of those interactions. And then on the local level, each individual within the group can be doing their own endeavors, and in that case, they're creating that commons. They're the judge of last resort around that domain. So it's that Haudenosaunee confederation that I post every now and then about, as you move up in levels of complexity, the domain of decidability is only about the transactions at that level of the level just below. Anything beyond that becomes an imposition, on all the entities or units below it. So we can model ourselves that way, I think.
Yeah, there are so many complex questions that come to mind, and we need a manifesto or something, just to have it all written down and just have a book, but then we become like a political entity, basically.
Yeah, or even if it's like, I mean, I hate to say it, but even like a constitution.
Yeah,
and
basically.
I thought with the first group we wouldn't need that. That it was just a set of shared values. Socially, we don't have any constitution. We just have shared values. But it became clear, and that's why I've got all that strict speech on the second group, is that there does need to be a judge of last resort, and it is a property. And if it is a property, then it has to be defended. So things like, whether it's a manifesto or a constitution, it really becomes the terms of contract. If you're giving an oath or you're agreeing to a contract, you need to know what the terms are. There needs to be that definition there, or it goes hog wild and it just dissipates and destroys itself.
But I thought what was easier in what we're doing is that we're from the perspective of via negativa. It's like, don't do this, don't impose a cost on another. It makes it pretty simple what we're enforcing. And it makes the judging and the a lot easier than obviously the repayment or remuneration. If you have, okay, I have imposed a cost, then that's where people have to get involved. Like, well, how do you make this right? And it's having a judge of last resort, or having those those become common laws, or these are kind of our codes. This is where we've solved this locally. Oh, we ran into this before. This is how we solved it. We did this, this, and this. And so each of those could be different. The way we handle it in Hawaii might be different than a cost imposed in Toronto.
And then what we have is a competition for the discovery of resolution, rather than policy, but resolution that we can compare notes, we can adopt, we can adapt.
So I think
that's the brilliance of what Kurt was putting forward about law via negativa, and judge discovered law as being a rewriting of resolution as opposed to policy.
Right.
Yeah.
And then if you keep that open, and that it doesn't stay a policy forever, and that people can adopt new policies, then where does that then kind of becomes legislative? To at a local level, say I've got a band of misfits and we usually cut people's hands off if they steal, and then you go, hey, that doesn't seem to be working well. We got a whole bunch of handicapped people here now, and they're a burden to our community. I think we're going to go kill them. Well, then we find out this other community, they don't cut the hands off. They make them work as a slave for the person at 10 times the cost of the thing that was taken. Well, that seemed to work all right. Okay, so should we walk through like this judging the restitution? That how do they change that? What if one side becomes more like a caliphate and they go, I don't care if you do the slave one. We're gonna keep cutting hands here.
Yeah, and I think that's why there needs to be some definition to say, if you're going to go there, you're no longer part of us.
All right.
You can't associate with us. We boycott first. If you continue, you're imposing upon our name and our values, and then we retaliate. And I don't think that this is anything large or complicated, and I think we've already defined it, that it is natural law based on agency, primarily, largely defined by property in toto, as well as agency in toto. Testimonialism, or at least empiricism, which is where we kind of deviated from the last group. And there's a third one that I can't think of, so maybe we should write it down.
Well, it reminds me that when you were painting the picture earlier, that this human history, we've had iterations in these in-groups, then kind of create their own government. They become a state. There's a parasite to the state. Basically, like the predator and parasite have their forms, and cooperation gets squished out. The middle keeps getting squeezed every single time. But we've had iterations where we've gotten very close to the bright light, right? Like, so common law, Magna Carta type stuff, and then you had other versions where the noble leaders really had their head on straight for a little bit and seemed to set us back on course. And then parasites are going to parasite, and they come in, and predators are going to take over and dominate. And you have financial, like the monetary economic system. What was done to take that over was a monumental feat. So I kind of like to highlight those, because
but that's where I think the importance of agency in toto comes in.
Is you're giving historical reference to.
Yeah, and the notion of agency in toto, when I was thinking this through, because agency in toto is very close to a positiva definition, because we're talking about the cultivation of something. But I don't see it that way. A negativa application of agency in toto doesn't inform interpersonal conflict, because you could define agency as anything. Opportunity, all of a sudden the definition is anything.
Breaking windows could be
agency. or just taking up my time to have a conversation could be an imposition on my agency. So it doesn't inform interpersonal conflict, and if you tried to, it would just immediately become discretionary rule. So property in toto does that, because the property is what gives you measurement in terms of the decidability. Where agency in toto comes in is the relationship between the individual and the group. It provides measurability, decidability in terms of the commons. So a commons only has value if it contributes to the development of agency of the group. If it's imposing arbitrarily or discretionary on the agency of the group, then it's not a valuable commons. So now we know what to get rid of and what to apply our efforts to. And then inversely, you wouldn't be an active agent without that enriched environment. You do have a responsibility as an individual to contribute back. So then what kind of contribution is that? Is that working in a labor camp? Is it, so agency in toto informs that bit. And I think that this is where we could distinguish ourselves differently from any other spin-off of proprietarianism or the libertarian field, is that we have defined the means of measure to organize cohesively across an individualistic sentiment. We won't atomize if we do this. And we can maintain cohesion while preserving the adaptability and the speed that individualism provides. So I think to a great extent we have these things defined, but they're all over the place. We just need to pull it together. And I honestly think it's a page. You know, it's a page, and then it's having some sort of symbol or identity to attach to it, which is really the bridge from the practical to the archetypal, and it's shorthand in terms of communicating. That over time, whatever symbol it is, a paw print or SN is just a way of quickly identifying groups and group participation.
Right.
Which then brings up the other thing that's been going on this week a little bit with Ivar. And I can't remember who posted it, and then I tagged you, Ivar, in it because it pertained to archetypes. And I can't remember what it is now.
Can't either. What was it again?
Was it on that music thread? I can't remember what it is. It's lost. We'll have to check.
So we're looking for something archetypal.
Well, I think we have it, and quite accidentally when I said sheepdog, and then we talked about wolves. There seems to be a mythical element or an archetypal element developing out of that.
Oh, man being born from the wolves.
Well, all of that, those parables or coevolution, that story, and the sentiment behind sheepdog, but also sort of being wolves in battles, guard dogs at home. We've got a symbol there, and I think it has some legs, both historically, because we can draw back to the Dogon tribes, or I can't remember the Dogon grave sites forward, but there has been this thread through high individualistic societies going back thousands of years. All we're doing is re-recognizing it and redefining it today. And then what came to mind to me after that, because I normally listen to classical music, I've only just now started listening to popular music again, and I keep going back to the playlists that Lincoln posts. And I was thinking about it this week, going, why am I doing that? And it's because they're almost like folk songs where they're telling a story and they're communicating a plight or a human situation. They're speaking to a common personal experience, which implicitly expresses a set of values and desires, where other music doesn't do that.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. And the socialist connection to folk music and stuff like that all came rushing in. I have no idea if there are any music songwriters out there. Maybe we can inspire a few of them.
All the musicians I know, talking to artists about like political ideas is just, it's a lost cause in my experience.
Yeah. I talk about really hard to get to. Speaking of the wrong part of the brain, you can try and tape it.
Yeah, and it's almost like if I try to get into the artistic mood and like paint something or draw, going and to think about politics after that is just I don't make any sense. It's like when you have to switch on the creative spirit. You're entering something that doesn't make any sense, but only through intuition and feeling. So then trying to be logical after that, I don't do the artistic stuff that much anymore because I just can't switch between the two.
That's funny because I'm finding the opposite. I used to be an artist ages ago. And I'm finding the more I explore these civilizational systems and the stuff that we're trying to define and create, it clarifies values. And then when you just deal with the value itself, the valuation, see, I'm talking logically about it right now. There is a sentiment and there is a desire and there is an identity behind that and a desire behind that then wants to spin off back into the art. And then what I find is then you can't separate the logical concepts from the art, and then what you end up doing is just some sort of mosaic, or it destroys the art because there's no pure feeling anymore. It's already been defined somehow.
But that's like classical art. It operates that way. There's like it's clear and it's defined, but like the artistic influences I went through, they were basically like Basquiat, or the guys that were making something that people in the alt-right or new right always trash it. But I really liked insane chaos that doesn't have any footing in reality, because it inspires me to into wonder, but that wonder isn't leading anywhere. So
right. Yeah, and that's interesting too, because Todd has a few times mentioned archetypes in terms of archaeofuturism is what he kept referring to, and the notion of history tying back into future. And then it dawned on me that my focus quite often is always looking back. What have we done? Values of the Enlightenment, the history, and that sort of thing, rather than turning and saying what's forward. And it kept on. It was going like, why is there the space right and stuff like this? What is this? And then it dawns on me that the European exploration and conquering spirit, the next domain is space, right? And then I thought that was interesting. That archaeofuturism is tying up, long time horizons into the past and into the future. Which is worth exploring. So I don't think I'll give you a sense of what I'm getting at. I don't think I can ignore aesthetics anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are definitely important.
Yeah.
Especially in your home. Like I try to have the desktop like some classical painting, or I have a painting in my bedroom, so it's just landscape. It's nice to wake up and see some, like just a bridge over a lake, and it's just basic stuff. Nothing complex.
But if you value nature, that is beautiful for you, right? And so Hutchison and the connection of aesthetics and ethics, and underneath it is value, right? So, so one of the thoughts that came across is in terms of aesthetics, I don't think it should be something that's designed or thought through and planned. It's something that has to spin out of the community. As the community grows cohesion, I think an aesthetic will start to emerge out of it.
You think the aesthetic might have a meta quality to it? Like one of the things that I see is that by having this information age, we've been able to absorb a lot more information, and so that we see these meta patterns, and that space right, meta right is kind of on that same aesthetic. And even when you are sharing, Bill, about being able to look back and to look forward, there is a observer quality that is there. And so if you remember, a deep amount of your work is based on the meditative progress, how you progress through meditation. And there's an exchange between you and I that talks about how you have the levels, even in the 5 tribes, line up with the 9 years of development, where you have physical for 9 years, then you have emotional for the next 9 years, then you have mental comes online. The third one is actually witnessing, where you have that observer comes on and you start to see yourself, or you just are witnessing others in less of a reactive cause and effect. The witness comes online, and then that up to 45. So that 5th one is the non-dual. This is where you're in the dance, you're witnessing and participating at the same time. So there is that beautiful progression of consciousness. You could also say that humanity goes through this possibly in waves. And then what I'm pointing to in terms of this meta is what happens when we are collectively witnessing. So I think that potentially the stage right now is collective intellectual. It's like that I am great part, which is we went from physical, emotional, mental. Now we have a collective in the mental. That's why it's really easy to persuade people on identity politics, because they are identified with it, that I am great or I am the victim or whatever is within that one. It takes, we have the breakaway where we have people are now able to witness that there's manipulation of the intellect, how people are, but they're still too identified with it. And even I fell prey to it because I was identifying from the side of, I know who the enemy is, I'm committed to destroying the enemy, which there's an element to that, and there's good use of that energy. But you were saying, well, why don't you focus on your self-defense qualities so that it's just impossible for your enemy to get a stronghold, you know? I was like, oh, all right. So now it's less out there and it's more, what can I do, which has more self-responsibility, it has more empowerment, it has a lot more of what's under my control.
And it's creative versus destructive. Right.
So what I am positioning in terms of this aesthetic that maybe we're looking for is to be aware of this. And if the aesthetic lies in, we can nudge, it's the collective I am up to the collective we're great, you know, that might be the nudge. Or that we just understand, if we're truly meta, then we would understand the aesthetic that's going to work for the life sucks, the my life sucks, the I'm great, the we're great, the life is great. Like we would understand that the aesthetic that calls to all of them.
Well, and I think that's it. That's what's been running through my mind while you were speaking, is that each of them, recognizing that each of them are phases within a spectrum. They're points on a spectrum, a continuum. On one hand, accommodates different aesthetics, different goods, different values to emerge out of that. And then the only thing that we don't permit is what we recognize as the bad. So we're back to positiva and negativa. That all of those narratives are permissible if you understand that what's going on is that there's awareness accompanied by a narrative. That the narrative is important for processing and comprehending against evaluation, but the awareness has to take precedent. So now we're talking testimonialism and truthful reporting. So everything that we're talking about is meta. It's meta-political, it's meta-social, it's meta-aesthetics. But identifying what our meta is resting on is natural processes. So I think that's a distinguishing factor of us than anything else, is sort of nature, natural processes, is what we're bending a knee to.
Well, remember to add further clarification, when I say that we're great and the witnessing, that still isn't non-dual. So even in the Buddhist, there is a stage beyond even just witnessing something, which is to recognize our participation. It's the non-dual. It's dancing with the dance rather than just standing and watching. And it's like, oh, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to dance with the flow. And so I would encourage our sheepdog ethos to have, this is what you can do. And for a large part of it, it's identifying what you refuse to not do. Like it's the via negativa. It still allows all the positiva because it's the most aligned with nature, is just don't do this. Don't impose your costs on others. And, you know, and then defend not only yourself and your family and your kin, go from there and defend the innocent. And so I guess what I'm making a distinction around, it's great to wake up and be observant of the narrative and witnessing it. And then it's a whole nother to be active in your community and dance your dance there, speak your speak, do your act, play your music.
Right. So like with the 10 bulls, the 8th bull is, it's remerging with nature. Then the next one is, it ends off essentially re-engaging with the illusion again. So you've recognized the awareness and observation. Now you resubmerge and you play in it, and now it's wu-wei, it's folly, controlled folly and stuff. Yeah. We have 1 minute 46. Do you want to do one more? or should we leave this as a segue for next week? And then we'll have some structure around next week, which I never have any structure on. And
Yeah, let's leave it for
we'll
next
have a
week.
week to think about it. Do you want to do that? Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you again, guys. Have a great week.
Yeah.
We'll see you in text.
Okay. See ya.
Yeah.